Welcome to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner on a mission to change the way that we support women with endometriosis. Endo is a full-body disease that impacts your mind, body, and spirit in countless ways that aren't often addressed the way that women truly deserve. We are here to talk about all of it. Please keep in mind that the content of this show has been created for educational purposes only and should never be used as a replacement for medical diagnosis or treatment. Hey, my friend, and welcome back to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. So, before we dig into today's episode, I just wanted to share something with you all, a new feature that's going on in the world of podcasting here that I kind of just discovered myself, didn't even realize it was there. There's a new feature called fan mail, and I think it's kind of a cool feature because it allows, I'm always talking to you guys and sharing my thoughts and ideas and everything with you, and the fan mail gives you guys an opportunity to let me know your thoughts and everything about the podcast or whatever. And basically how it works is if you go into the show notes at the very top, it says something like send a text, and I get those messages. Now, part of the reason I'm bringing this up is that I got a couple of these messages in recently, and I was super excited about it because, the way it shows up, it says send a text. And so I'm thinking it's kind of a two-way messaging system. Well, it turns out it's not. It's a one-way thing. So you can talk to me, but I can't reply, which is sad. It doesn't show exactly where it came from. I just can see the messages. So I wanted to bring that up on here because I had a few of you reach out asking if I am taking clients. And so the answer is yes. I am currently, at this point in time, at the time I'm recording this, I am currently accepting new clients. And there is a link that's always in the show notes. It's kind of just permanently living in the show notes where you can book a free consultation with me. So I have an opportunity to schedule a free 30 minutes of time with me, and you can schedule that right there in the show notes. There's a link for that. Or you can also head over to www.endobellygirl.com/services. So I just wanted to share that in reply to the people who had reached out with questions on that. And thank you to everybody who shared any sort of commentary via the fan mail there. And please keep it coming. It's super fun for me when I get little messages from you guys letting me know what you think of the podcast, what you liked about the recent episode, anything at all. So hit that little send a text button at the top of your show notes there. Send me a little message. Let me know what you think. And I'd love to hear from you. And I'll maybe it'll be fun once in a while to share some of those messages on the podcast and just share what people are saying. Okay. So 2 weeks ago, episode 55, I recorded an episode all about cycle syncing and how to connect with and support each phase of your cycle. So kind of just talking about how the hormones fluctuate and how we can kind of work with that rather than fighting it, working against it, trying to control the hormones, which I do think is an important conversation. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, be sure to go back a couple of episodes and listen to the cycle syncing one, episode 55. And today, and actually for these next couple of episodes, we're going to take some time to break down some of the things that are really important to know about your hormones, because hormones are something that are very heavily talked about, of course, and like it or not, they are a huge part of our lives. You may have noticed that, especially when you're struggling with endometriosis, maybe you're struggling with fertility or irregular cycles, all the things that can be going on in your body. Hormones are definitely something to be aware of. And a big part of the message that I want to get across through this podcast is the idea that we need to start to work with our hormones, not against them. Or I guess that's really my question. How can we work with the hormones rather than against them? Or trying to control them, or trying to fight them, or trying to just turn them off? Because at the end of the day, hormones are not the enemy. In fact, they have so many wonderful benefits, which we're going to touch on today. And this is something that I talk about a lot, just the fact that hormones are never the root cause of what's going on in your body. Hormone imbalance of any kind at the end of the day is a symptom. And my job, at least, I was going to say your job, but maybe not. My job as a functional nutritionist is to dig deeper and ask all the questions about why those hormones might be out of balance. So today, we're going to really focus in on estrogen because hormones in general, that's a really big topic. It's a little too much to pack into just one episode. So I'm going to split this up. Today, we're going to focus in on estrogen, and next episode, we are going to be talking about progesterone. So be sure to stay tuned for that because that'll kind of round out this conversation. And really, I feel like estrogen is like this poor, misunderstood friend. It's like that we all had that one friend growing up that just was a little different and a little out there and nobody really quite got them. Maybe that was you. Sometimes I feel like that was me. I don't know. And I feel like estrogen is kind of that way. It's this person, this friend that nobody really likes and doesn't really get it, even though it actually has a lot of benefits and is really good for us. So anyway, I hope you like my fun analogy there, and I hope that actually made sense. So we're going to dig in today. We're going to unpack a lot of things when it comes to estrogen. We're going to talk about how estrogen and endo actually interact, the important things to know, because I think there's a lot of misconception with that, what estrogen actually does in your body, and why blocking estrogen may not be the amazing solution that it's made out to be. So let's start with talking about what estrogen actually does for us, because it does have a lot of benefits. So estrogen helps us to build the uterine lining each month in preparation for pregnancy. At the end of the day, more than anything, estrogen is a growth hormone. So things related to growth, even as we're in the puberty years, especially the growth of your breasts, the growth of your sexual organs, all of that is in relation to estrogen. And then as you're a fully grown adult, still the estrogen helps to support the building of the uterine lining each month. Estrogen also, though, helps to stimulate cervical mucus, which is incredibly important for fertility. And some of the things that maybe aren't quite as well known with estrogen is that estrogen is actually known as the happy hormone. It helps to support mood as well as libido. It boosts serotonin and dopamine. It enhances insulin sensitivity, which is really important for blood sugar management. Estrogen also promotes skin hydration and the mucosal lining of your vagina. And it's important for bone health as well. So it has a lot of benefits. Now, we tend to think of endometriosis being associated with excess estrogen or estrogen dominance, and it certainly can be. I'm going to touch on that in a little bit as well, because that's definitely an important conversation to have. I do see that frequently in my practice, but low estrogen, believe it or not, can actually still be a thing with endometriosis. I have seen this in my practice. So symptoms of low estrogen can include things like hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, brain fog, headaches, depression, heart palpitations, yeast infections, dry skin, vaginal dryness, painful sex, low libido, bone loss, memory, and incontinence can all be symptoms of low estrogen. And basically, you're also just losing out on all the benefits of estrogen that I mentioned before. This is why a lot of the symptoms that you're hearing are concerns during menopause, because estrogen levels begin to lower, and so you start to experience some of those symptoms of low estrogen. That's why things like bone health is more of a concern after menopause, because you have less estrogen. Sometimes your skin and your vagina start to dry out because you have less estrogen. So you hopefully you're starting to see the picture of why estrogen is actually important in your body and helpful for us. Now, those symptoms of low estrogen can come up when you just have low estrogen going on in your body. It can also happen with estrogen blocking medications. I actually had an experience with this years ago now, where my doctor put me on a hormone blocking medication called Lupron. It's a fairly common medication used for endometriosis, amongst other things. And, she warned me that there would probably be some side effects and, that it was blocking estrogen from feeding the endometriosis is the way it was explained to me. But nothing could have prepared me for that just lack of estrogen in my body. It felt like I was in a full-blown menopause in my 20s. Basically, I was. It was a medical menopause that thankfully for me was short-lived. I know others have had not so great experiences coming off of those medications. But I mean, I had hot flashes and night sweats and headaches and just so many uncomfortable symptoms that came along with that. So I have personal experience with what it feels like to not have estrogen. And even if you haven't been on medications like that, you may also experience symptoms like that while you're on your period. It's not uncommon that at least the first 1 to 3 days of your period, a lot of women, myself included, will have some of those low estrogen symptoms, because your estrogen actually does drop at that time. The drop in your hormones is largely what signals your menstruation to start. So it's not uncommon to have things like hot flashes and night sweats and some of those other symptoms that I mentioned during that time. And then day 3 or 4, for me, it's usually around day 3, estrogen levels start to rise again and you start to feel like a human being again. So it just gives you an idea of how necessary estrogen is in your body. Now, part of the reason I bring this up too is because one of the most common treatments in the conventional medical world for endometriosis is hormonal birth control. Now, hormonal birth control, we are all told, helps to regulate our hormones and regulate our cycles. And I know that's the story that I thought to be true for so many years. And there's a lot more to that story. In fact, I did a whole episode. I didn't happen to write down the number, but let me see if I can look it up quickly while I'm talking to you. I did an episode. Here it is. Episode number 28, which I recorded with a good friend and colleague of mine, Crystal Felice. We did an episode all about birth control and kind of the ups and downs with that, the things to consider. So I can definitely link that one in the show notes so you can go back and listen to that one. But there's a whole conversation to be had about hormonal birth control, because one of the important things to know is that the hormonal birth control, the combination type birth control that contains both estrogens and progesterones, they don't contain actual hormones. They contain synthetic forms of your hormones. So the estrogens used in hormonal birth control is typically ethinyl estradiol, which is a synthetic form of estrogen. And what that does is it takes up the hormone receptor sites for our natural estrogen, blocking it, which is how it prevents pregnancy and can be supportive of symptoms. That's why, I'm never going to, not that it's my place by any means to tell you whether or not to be on any medication, but certainly why I wouldn't give a blanket statement of nobody should be on birth control, because I do understand and see how sometimes the benefits can outweigh the costs if it's really helping to manage symptoms. So at the end of the day, it's, a decision that's going to be unique to you as to whether that's a good idea or not. But I do think it's important to have all the facts. And that is pure fact right there, right? Hormonal birth control contains typically ethinyl estradiol or some form of synthetic estrogen that blocks our natural estrogen from doing its job, meaning you're also losing the benefits of that natural estrogen that we talked about before. So I'll be unpacking that a little bit more in a bit. I'm going to circle back to that one here. But first, I wanted to take a look at excess estrogen and estrogen dominance. I do say both of those things because they're not the same. Oftentimes, they're used kind of interchangeably, excess estrogen and estrogen dominance, those two terms. They're not the same thing. And I'm going to explain why. So, estrogen dominance is pretty common with endometriosis. Typical symptoms of estrogen dominance includes fatigue, weight gain, mood swings, PMS, heavy periods, migraines, headaches, anxiety, depression, low libido, breast tenderness or swelling or fibrocystic breasts, uterine fibroids, cystic ovaries, water and fluid retention, clotting, especially clotting in your periods, increased body fat, and infertility. So again, those are symptoms that we see commonly alongside endometriosis as well, and that can definitely be a part of the puzzle. Now, remember, estrogen is a growth hormone, so many of the symptoms are related to that. So these symptoms are super common. So I can absolutely see how the conventional medical model sees the answer as like we need to block or remove the estrogen, right? So let's take a look. First, let's take a look at the difference between excess estrogen and estrogen dominance. So I mentioned those two things are different. Excess estrogen is outright too much estrogen. Your body's producing too much production. And or it can also be related to xenoestrogen exposure, the endocrine disrupting chemical. So that can come from chemicals in our environment, cleaning products, body products that we use, things around the home, food if we're eating conventionally raised produce and meat and things like that can contain those xenoestrogens, which basically mimic our natural hormones. We're going to break this down much more in a future episode because I definitely want to talk more about that. That's super important, the things that we expose our bodies to on a regular basis. But there are chemicals out there that can mimic our natural estrogen and block those receptor sites. So that can absolutely mimic the effects of having too much estrogen. Stress is also a major piece of the puzzle. Stress can cause progesterone to drop, which can cause that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone, which we're going to look at. Alcohol is another factor that can contribute to excess estrogen, and poor estrogen detoxification, because hormones in our body, the whole purpose there, or the whole cycle that we should be following, is that we use our hormones and then we lose them. We want to build them, we want to use them, and then we want to eliminate them from our bodies. And if that elimination pathway is not working effectively, which can happen for multiple reasons, oftentimes the liver is overburdened or we're not getting in the correct nutrients that we need in order to detoxify. This is another thing I'm going to dig more into on a future episode on just the whole way that our body uses and loses the hormones, because I think it's really important to have a full understanding of that as well. Guys know I'm a big believer. If you've been around here for any length of time, you know that I'm a big believer in understanding how your body works so that you're making informed decisions about your own body. Okay, and then we have estrogen dominance. So estrogen dominance really is an imbalance between your estrogen to progesterone ratio. So you have estrogen and progesterone. They really work kind of antagonistically to each other. So if progesterone is low, it can allow the estrogen to be higher and end up with the estrogen dominance symptoms. Now, because that's a ratio, you don't necessarily have to have high estrogen levels in order to experience estrogen dominance. In fact, you can, and I see this frequently in my practice, you can have low or normal estrogen levels, but have low progesterone, and that can still show up as estrogen dominance. So yes, it is actually possible to have low estrogen and to have estrogen dominance. I'll let that one sink in for a second. You can have both low estrogen and estrogen dominance at the same time. So it's not always a matter of having too much estrogen. And that's where some of the even more holistic and natural type supports can be a little tricky to work with, because you have to know what you're looking at. Do you actually have high estrogen, or do you just have poor estrogen clearance? Do you have low estrogen, but you just have even lower progesterone? Those are questions that need to be answered before you're really helping to support your hormones, or at least helping to support your hormones in an effective manner. And that, my friend, is why testing is important. That's why I'm a big fan of the whole test, don't guess route. At the very least, that means running serum hormone panels, looking both at estradiol, which is I didn't really break this down today, but there are actually 3 different types of estrogens in our body: estradiol, estrone, and estriol. I almost forgot the third one for a second there. Estradiol is the main form of estrogen that we use during our menstruating years outside of pregnancy. So that's the main one that I'm really talking about here as I'm talking about estrogen. It's estradiol. So that's the one that you want to be testing if you're testing estrogen levels. And then, of course, progesterone as well. Dutch test is great too. That's one that I use in my practice. That's a functional test that really looks at kind of all the things with the hormones. You can look at hormone levels, but also look at how your body is breaking down and metabolizing hormones. And that's really an important piece of the puzzle too, because that can give us a lot of information about not just the hormone levels, but what your body is doing with the hormones. So I even like to use those kind of in combination in my practice. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of both. Of course, the serum testing, that's the blood testing, is much cheaper. So that's something to consider as well. And also, it's important to note when it comes to any kind of testing that your hormones, remember, fluctuate a lot throughout the month. Estrogen has a lot of ups and downs throughout the month. So when you test really matters. No matter what kind of testing you're doing, the timing matters. So definitely be sure to work with a practitioner when you're testing so that you know when to test. I can't give you an exact day to test. Typically, oftentimes estradiol is tested on day 3, but you want to also be looking at it later in your cycle, like after ovulation. And that you kind of have to time it based on when your ovulation's happening, because ovulation does not always happen on the same day of the month across the board. That is one of those, things we were all taught in science class in school, that ovulation happens on day 14. And I can't tell you how many people I work with in my practice who that's just not true for, myself included. I can't remember the last time I ovulated on day 14. That's not a thing for me. Mine typically is more like day 18. That's kind of standard for me and just has been. So that's just unique to me. And we're all a little bit different. I know some people who ovulate more like on day 11 or 12 of their cycle, and some who ovulate later. So it's more a matter of timing in comparison to your ovulation, not based on a calendar day. Now, I mentioned that low progesterone in relation to estrogen can be an issue. We're going to unpack that more next week in our next episode, but stress and nutrition definitely are a big piece of that. We'll unpack that more next week. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on too today, because this is something that I receive a lot of questions about. Why does estrogen matter in relation to endometriosis? And it's not quite like so many of us have been taught. Because I know when I first was diagnosed with endometriosis, my doctor was telling me a whole lot about how estrogen is feeding endo, and we have to basically shut down the estrogen so that we're not continuing to put fuel on the fire. And there's some truth to that, of course. It's not like that's completely made up, or I wouldn't even be talking about estrogen on this podcast episode here. But at the end of the day, endometriosis is a systemic whole body disease that mainly is rooted in immune dysfunction and inflammation. It's an immune and an inflammatory disease, not a reproductive hormonal disease. endometriosis has been found in men, it's been found in babies, and of course, their hormones are vastly different than cycling female hormones. So that kind of tells you a lot right there. And just some of the ways that endometriosis works and moves in our bodies just doesn't make sense being purely a hormonal disease. Now, that doesn't mean that endometriosis isn't affected by hormones, because it absolutely is. Excess estrogen can worsen endo. Doesn't cause endo, but it can worsen endo and can add fuel to the fire. Endometriosis lesions can even develop estrogen receptor sites. So that's part of the piece of the puzzle as well. At least that's what's been coming up in research. So it is absolutely something to consider. Now, again, does that mean we need to shut down estrogen? Not necessarily, because remember that when we are shutting down estrogen, we are also shutting down all of the wonderful benefits of estrogen that I mentioned before. So, it's a tightrope that we have to walk to make sure that we're supporting our bodies in all the ways that it needs. So what I do in my practice, and what I recommend in general anyway, is to first of all think from a root cause approach if you really want to support your body, including supporting the estrogen levels. And that means supporting the immune system, supporting inflammation, figuring out where that inflammation is coming from and why, what I call inflammation hunting, where we're looking around for where that inflammation may be coming from, and addressing the reasons that hormones may be imbalanced in the first place. I also recorded an episode a while back regarding hormones and blood sugar, and I can tell you what episode number that was in just a moment here. These episodes are kind of just popping into my brain as I'm going along. Otherwise, I would have had them prepared and ready for you ahead of time. Okay, I'm not finding it quickly, and I don't want to spend all my recording time here looking for that episode. I will go ahead and just link to that one in the show notes. But I recorded an episode regarding the connection between blood sugar and your hormones. So I'll link to that one in the show notes so that you can go back and listen to that one too, because that's definitely has a huge effect on hormone health. And I'm going to be bringing in some more ideas in the next couple of episodes. We're going to be talking about progesterone. We're going to be talking about estrogen detoxification. So we're going to be unpacking that more. Just make sure to subscribe to the show and stay tuned so that you don't miss out on all of that. Okay, so I wanted to kind of wrap this up with a nice little bow here today. Some of the conclusions, takeaways that I want you to walk away with more than anything here. So number one, estrogen can feed endometriosis but doesn't cause endometriosis. Number two, that estrogen also has positive effects on our bodies, right? Estrogen is not the enemy that it often is made out to be. Number three, blocking estrogen also blocks the positive effects, can sometimes cause more problems. And the real work is to figure out why estrogen is out of balance and support it from a root cause approach. So, like I said, I'm going to be digging into that more in a future episode. Next week, we're going to focus in on progesterone, but the following one, we're going to be talking more about that, all the things that can affect the hormones and your estrogen clearance and everything. But some of the go-to things that, these are really the first places that I look as a practitioner when I see estrogen dominance or excess estrogen going on. Number one, are you pooping every day? If you are constipated on a regular basis, you're probably not clearing estrogen well, because when your stool is kind of hanging out in your colon for too long, those estrogens that are on their way out can get reabsorbed into your system and lead to that excess estrogen picture or estrogen dominance picture. So that's one big thing. Make sure you're pooping. If you're not pooping, I've got several episodes on gut health you can go back to, or feel free to reach out to me if you need some tips on how to how to support your body in being able to poop daily. Trust me, this is something I talk about every day, totally normal for me. Number 2 is definitely cleaning up your environment. I mentioned those xenoestrogens before. They're found in a lot of conventional cleaning products, personal care products. So we really want to look for those good quality products that are using clean ingredients. The Environmental Working Group, EWG, has a couple of really good resources out there. It has one called Skin Deep, where you can look up your beauty products and personal care products and see how clean the ingredients are. You can also look at they have another website that is all about cleaning products, where you can go and look up your cleaning products and see how clean they are, see how much they might be impacting your body. I know this sounds like maybe an odd thing to think about when it comes to hormones, but it really has huge impact on your hormones. This whole class of chemicals has been shown to be endocrine disrupting chemicals, meaning they are chemicals that disrupt our hormones. That is proven. There's been tons and tons of research done on that. Unfortunately, they just continue to still allow those ingredients, which is frustrating. So that's where we have to be smart consumers and pay attention to what we're buying and what we're surrounding our bodies with and putting on our bodies. The biggest thing to really be aware of is scented products. Anything with synthetic fragrance. So think laundry detergents, perfume, lotions, shampoos, anything, definitely like plugins and candles and things like that have that synthetic fragrance, especially if it really hangs and lingers in the air for long periods of time. Think that's not good for your hormones. There are products out there that are scented with essential oils that can be much better for our bodies. So if you love the scents, I get it. I rather like yummy smelling things too, but just be aware of where that scent is coming from, if it's something that might be impacting your hormones. Other things to think about: alcohol, I mentioned that before, can have an impact on estrogen levels. So at the very least, limiting your alcohol, not making it a huge part of your life or avoiding it. For myself, I don't drink a ton of alcohol. I tend to limit it to special occasions and things like that, and have definitely felt a lot better doing that. And then stress. Stress is a huge thing too. I've recorded a couple of episodes in the past all about stress. So, that's a big thing. We'll talk about that too when it comes to the estrogen clearance and progesterone too. Stress can have huge impacts on progesterone levels. So I'll be touching base on that next week even more. But definitely, practicing stress management techniques, incorporating your deep breathing and journaling and meditation and all the things to help to support your stress levels can be of huge benefit. So those are the best places to start. The basics go a very long way when it comes to supporting your hormones. So those are good places to start. All right, my friend, I hope that you found this helpful. Feel free to reach out if you need support. I know that was kind of a lot of information today, but like I said, I'm a big fan of helping people to really understand your bodies and what's going on. But if you have any questions, any concerns, anything at all that's coming up for you, feel free to hit that little send a text button at the top of the show notes. That's a whole lot of fun. I love getting your messages. Just remember, it's a one-way street, so I can't actually reply on that platform other than just replying maybe on a future podcast episode. So you can kind of tune in for that if you have something like that can be answered that way. Or you can reach out to me on Instagram at endobellygirl. That's definitely a platform that's more of a two-way street where we can have a conversation. I'm always happy to have conversations through that platform. I love connecting with real human beings. Or you also can head into the show notes, and I think the link says something like work with me one-on-one or book a free consultation, I honestly don't even remember what it says, but there is a link in the show notes that's always there where you can schedule in that free 30-minute consultation if you're thinking like, hey, I really would like some one-on-one support with some of this stuff. I do at this point in time have a few spaces available, and I'd be happy to work with you. So that's another fun way to connect with me. All right. So next week, be sure to stay tuned because this is only a part of the conversation here. We're going to be digging more into some hormone stuff coming up, including next week, a deep dive on progesterone. You won't want to miss it. It's kind of the other half of this puzzle. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss it, be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. That way you'll know when the new episode comes out. And or if you're not already, get yourself on my email list. I do send out an email each week when the new episode comes out. Easiest way to do that is you can sign up for my free I have a free ultimate guide to building your own endometriosis diet, and that link is always in the show notes as well. If you download that, it'll ask you to put in your email address. You'll be on my email list. I promise I'm not going to spam you and send you 4,000 emails, but I will notify you when there's a new episode out and send you some helpful information and things along the way. So feel free to do that as well. All right, I think that's all I've got for you today. Thanks so much for being here, my friend, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share with a friend and subscribe so that you can keep coming back for more. If you are ready to take the next step towards getting to the root cause of your endo symptoms like endobelly, pain, fatigue, and so much more, you need to download my free ultimate guide to building your own endometriosis diet. You can find the link in the show notes or at www.endobellygirl.com. Until next time, my friend.